The ambulance doors burst open at 2:47 a.m. And the paramedics rushed through with a gurney carrying what looked like a bundle of rags until Dr. Sarah Mitchell saw the small pale face emerging from beneath the dirty blankets. The girl couldn't have been more than 11 or 12 years old. Her lips tinged blue, her breathing shallow and labored. Sarah had been working the night shift at Boston Memorial Hospital for 6 years now, ever since she'd left her previous life behind, and she'd seen countless homeless patients come through these doors. But something about this child made her chest tighten in a way she couldn't explain. The lead paramedic, Rodriguez, rattled off vitals as they wheeled her into Trauma Bay 3. Found her collapsed behind a dumpster on Commonwealth Avenue. Temp is 1043. BP is 85/50. Respiratory rate is 32 and shallow. She's been in and out of consciousness. No ID, no family that we could find. Sarah pulled on her gloves and moved to the girl's side, her trained eyes already assessing the situation. Severe dehydration, obvious malnutrition, and the rattling sound in her chest suggested pneumonia, possibly complicated by sepsis. The child's face was gaunt, her cheekbones too prominent beneath deep brown skin that looked ashen in the harsh fluorescent lighting. Her clothes were little more than rags, layers of torn shirts, and a jacket that had probably been scavenged from a donation bin. But it was her hands that caught Sarah's attention. Small hands with dirt crusted under the fingernails, but fingers that were long and elegant, hands that should have been holding school books or playing piano, not digging through garbage for food. Sarah's team moved with practiced efficiency around the small body on the gurney. Nurse Jasmine Williams started in 4-line while resident Dr. Marcus Webb began cutting away the girl's filthy clothing to attach monitoring equipment. Sarah leaned over the child using her stethoscope to listen to her lungs, and what she heard made her jaw clench. Fluid in both lungs, crackling sounds that indicated severe infection. This girl was in critical condition, and from the look of her emaciated frame, she'd been sick for days, maybe weeks, without any medical care. Let's get a chest x-ray, full blood panel, and start her on broad-spectrum antibiotics, Sarah ordered, her voice calm, despite the urgency she felt. I want cultures for everything, and get respiratory therapy down here now. As she worked, Sarah found herself studying the girl's face. Even unconscious and ravaged by illness, there was something striking about her features, something that tugged at a memory Sarah couldn't quite grasp. The girl had dark, tightly coiled hair, matted and dirty, but Sarah could see it had once been thick and beautiful. Her bone structure was delicate but strong, and there was a small scar above her left eyebrow that looked old, well-healed. Sarah shook her head, forcing herself to focus on the medical emergency in front of her, rather than the strange sense of familiarity that made no logical sense whatsoever. The monitors beeped steadily as Sarah's team worked to stabilize the girl. Jasmine had gotten the 4-line in on the first try, and fluids were flowing into the child's dehydrated body. Marcus was drawing blood for the lab work, filling vial after vial with dark red liquid that would tell them exactly what they were fighting. Sarah adjusted the oxygen mask on the girl's face, making sure it was secure, but not too tight against her fragile skin. "X-rays here," called out Tom from radiology, wheeling in the portable machine. Sarah stepped back to let him work, watching as he positioned the equipment over the girl's chest. The image that appeared on the screen moments later confirmed her worst fears. Both lungs showed significant infiltrates, white clouds of infection that had spread throughout the tissue. This wasn't just pneumonia. This was severe, life-threatening pneumonia that had been left untreated for far too long. "Jesus," Marcus muttered, staring at the X-ray. "How long has she been sick?" Sarah shook her head. Days, maybe a week or more, living on the streets, no access to medical care, probably trying to tough it out until she couldn't anymore. She felt anger rising in her chest, anger at a system that let children fall through the cracks, that let them get this sick before anyone noticed or cared. The girl suddenly stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, she looked confused, disoriented, her gaze darting around the trauma bay with growing panic. Sarah immediately moved closer, her voice gentle but firm. "Hey, sweetheart, it's okay. You're in a hospital. You're safe. We're trying to help you." But the girl's breathing quickened, her heart rate spiking on the monitor. She tried to sit up, fighting against the hands trying to help her. "No, no, please," she gasped, her voice hoarse and desperate. "Don't send me back there. Please don't make me go back." Her eyes were wild with fear, and Sarah recognized that look. She'd seen it before in combat zones, in the eyes of civilians caught in crossfire, in the faces of people who'd been traumatized beyond what most people could imagine. Sarah reached out slowly, carefully, and placed her hand on the girl's shoulder. "I promise you, no one here is going to hurt you. You're very sick, and we need to help you get better. Can you tell me your name?" The girl's breathing was rapid, panicked, but something in Sarah's voice seemed to reach her. Her eyes focused on Sarah's face, studying her with an intensity that was unsettling in someone so young and so sick. Then her gaze dropped lower to Sarah's arms where she'd rolled up her sleeves to work, and everything changed. The girl's expression shifted completely, her eyes widening as she stared at Sarah's left forearm. Sarah glanced down and felt her stomach drop. There, just visible beneath the harsh fluorescent lights, was the small trident tattoo she'd gotten 12 years ago, a lifetime ago, in a world she'd left behind. It was barely 2 inches across. Simple black ink. But to those who knew what it meant, it was everything. The trident, the Budweiser, the symbol of the Navy SEALs. Sarah had been careful over the years to keep it covered, wearing long sleeves even in summer, making sure no one at the hospital ever saw it. She'd left that life behind 8 years ago, walked away from the teams and everything they represented, and she'd never looked back, or at least she'd tried not to. But now this dying child was staring at the tattoo, like she'd seen a ghost. The girl's cracked lips moved, forming words that Sarah couldn't quite hear over the noise of the ER, the beeping monitors, the voices of her team working around them. Sarah leaned closer, her heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with the medical emergency. "What did you say, sweetheart?" she asked softly. The girl's hand reached out, trembling, and her fingers brushed against the tattoo on Sarah's arm. Her touch was light, almost reverent. And when she spoke again, her voice was clearer, stronger, despite her illness. "Are you a Navy SEAL?" she whispered. The trauma base seemed to freeze around them. Sarah was vaguely aware that her team was still working, still moving, still calling out vitals and adjusting equipment, but all she could hear was the rushing of blood in her ears. All she could see was this child's face looking up at her with eyes that suddenly seemed far too knowing, far too old for someone so young. "My mom had that tattoo," the girl continued, her voice barely audible, but each word landing like a hammer blow to Sarah's chest. "She showed it to me when I was little. She said it meant she was a warrior. She said only the bravest people in the world earned that mark." The girl's eyes were starting to glaze over again, the fever pulling her back under, but she kept talking, the words tumbling out in a rush. "She said it meant you never leave anyone behind. She said it meant you were part of something bigger than yourself. She said," and then her eyes rolled back and she collapsed against the gurney, unconscious, once more, leaving Sarah standing there with her hands still on the girl's shoulder, her mind reeling, her carefully constructed walls crumbling around her. Sarah's hands moved on autopilot, checking the girl's pulse, adjusting the oxygen mask, calling out orders to her team. But her mind was somewhere else entirely. In the 8 years since she'd left the Navy, since she'd walked away from the SEALs and everything that life had meant, she'd never once spoken about her service to anyone at this hospital. She'd buried that part of herself deep, locked it away behind the white coat and the stethoscope and the comfortable routine of civilian medicine. The tattoo was small, discreet, easily hidden, and she'd been so careful to keep it covered. How had this child recognized it? How did she even know what it meant? The trident was the symbol of the Navy SEALs, but it wasn't exactly common knowledge, especially not among homeless kids on the streets of Boston. Most people wouldn't recognize it, wouldn't know what those 3 prongs represented: sea, air, and land. And the girl had said her mother had the same tattoo. Sarah's throat tightened as she processed that information. There had only been a handful of women who'd made it through BUD/S training and earned the trident during Sarah's time in the service. The first woman hadn't graduated until 2021, and Sarah had been one of the early pioneers, one of the first 5 women to ever earn that mark. She'd known every single woman who'd gone through the program in those early years. They'd been a small, tight-knit group, sisters in arms in the most literal sense. The girl's monitor started alarming, pulling Sarah back to the immediate crisis. Her blood pressure was dropping, her oxygen saturation falling despite the supplemental oxygen they were giving her. The sepsis was progressing faster than they'd hoped. "She's going into septic shock," Marcus said, his voice tight with concern. "Dr. Mitchell, we need to intubate. She can't maintain her airway." Sarah nodded, her training overriding the emotional chaos threatening to overwhelm her. "Get me the intubation kit, Jasmine. Push another liter of saline wide open and start a norepinephrine drip. We need to support her blood pressure now." As she worked to secure the girl's airway, sliding the breathing tube down her throat with practiced precision, Sarah's mind kept circling back to those words. My mom had that tattoo. Who was this child? And why did Sarah feel like she was staring at a ghost from a past she'd tried so hard to forget? The girl's face, even slack with unconsciousness, seemed familiar in a way Sarah couldn't explain. The shape of her jaw, the set of her eyes, even the way her dark hair fell across her forehead. Sarah had seen those features before. She was certain of it. But the memory remained frustratingly out of reach. By the time they'd stabilized the girl enough to transfer her to the pediatric intensive care unit, the sun was starting to rise over Boston, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. It seemed obscene given the night's events. Sarah stood at the nurse's station, staring at the empty patient information form on her computer screen. Name unknown. Age approximately 11 to 13 years. Next of kin none. The words seemed to mock her, highlighting how little they knew about this child who'd somehow recognized the most carefully guarded secret of Sarah's life. She rubbed her eyes, exhausted, but knowing she wouldn't be able to sleep even if she tried. Her shift had technically ended an hour ago, but she couldn't bring herself to leave. The girl was upstairs in the PICA now on a ventilator, fighting for her life, and Sarah needed to know she was going to make it. She needed to know who this child was and how she knew about the trident. Behind her, she heard the distinctive click of expensive heels on linoleum and turned to see Margaret Chen from social services approaching, her ever-present clipboard clutched to her chest like armor. Margaret was in her mid-50s, with short gray hair and glasses that she wore on a chain around her neck. She was efficient, professional, and utterly unmoved by the human drama that played out in these halls every day. Sarah had worked with her on dozens of cases over the years. And while she respected Margaret's dedication to protocol, she'd never particularly liked her. "Dr. Mitchell," Margaret said, her voice crisp and businesslike. "I need to discuss the Jane Doe you brought in this morning." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "She has a name. We just don't know it yet." Margaret's expression didn't change. "Semantics, doctor. The point is this child is now a ward of the state. Once she's medically stable, she'll be placed in emergency foster care while we attempt to locate any family members." Something fierce and protective flared in Sarah's chest, surprising her with its intensity. She barely knew this girl, had only met her a few hours ago, but the thought of her being shuffled into the foster system made Sarah's hands clench into fists. "She's critically ill, Margaret. She's on a ventilator with bilateral pneumonia and sepsis. She's not going anywhere for a long time." Margaret made a note on her clipboard, her pen scratching across the paper with irritating precision. "Nevertheless, I need to follow protocol. Has she said anything that might help us identify her? Any information about family? Where she's been living? Anything at all?" Sarah hesitated, thinking about those whispered words. "Asterisk, are you a Navy SEAL? My mom had that tattoo asterisk. She should tell Margaret everything. It might help identify the girl. Might help find family." But something held her back. Sarah made a decision in that moment, one that went against every professional instinct she'd developed over 6 years of emergency medicine. She looked Margaret straight in the eye and lied. She was barely conscious when she came in. She didn't say anything coherent, just fever-induced delirium. Nothing that would help identify her. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly, and Sarah wondered if the social worker could sense the deception. But after a moment, Margaret simply nodded and made another note on her clipboard. Very well. I'll check back in 24 hours to assess her condition. In the meantime, I'll file the missing persons report and see if anyone's been looking for a girl matching her description. She turned to leave, then paused, glancing back at Sarah with an expression that might have been concern. Dr. Mitchell, you look exhausted. You should go home and get some rest. There's nothing more you can do here right now. But Sarah couldn't leave. Not yet. As soon as Margaret disappeared around the corner, Sarah headed for the elevators, riding up to the 4th floor where the PICU was located. The unit was quieter than the ER with dimmed lights and the constant soft beeping of monitors creating an almost peaceful atmosphere. Sarah found the girls' room easily, room 412, and stood outside the glass window looking in. The child looked even smaller now, dwarfed by the hospital bed and surrounded by machines. The ventilator breathed for her. The tube in her throat connected to the machine that was keeping her alive. For lines ran into both arms, delivering antibiotics, fluids, and medications to support her failing body. Her face had been cleaned. The dirt washed away to reveal deep brown skin and delicate features that made Sarah's chest ache with recognition she still couldn't quite place. Dr. Patricia Reeves, the attending pediatric intensivist, came up beside Sarah, her own face showing the exhaustion of a long night shift. Patricia was in her early 40s with kind eyes and a reputation for being one of the best pediatric critical care doctors in New England. Sarah had worked with her on several cases and trusted her judgment completely. She's a fighter, Patricia said softly, studying the monitors. Her labs came back. White blood cell count is through the roof. Her inflammatory markers are sky high and she's severely anemic, but her heart is strong and she's responding to the antibiotics. If we can get her through the next 48 hours, I think she has a real chance. Sarah nodded, unable to take her eyes off the girl's face. Has she woken up at all since we intubated her?
No.
We've got her sedated to keep her comfortable and let the ventilator do its work. But Sarah, Patricia hesitated, then continued in a lower voice. I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've seen a lot of homeless kids come through here. This girl, there's something different about her. The way she's malnourished, it's not recent. She's been living rough for months, maybe longer. But look at her teeth. Sarah leaned closer to the window, studying the girl's face.
Patricia was right.
Despite everything, despite the obvious neglect and hardship, the girl's teeth were straight, well cared for, or at least they had been at some point. She had orthodontic work, Sarah said slowly. Braces probably within the last few years. Exactly, Patricia confirmed. And look at her hands. Those scars on her palms and fingers. They're not from living on the streets. They're older, healed. They look like rope burns. Like she did a lot of climbing or rappelling at some point. Sarah's heart started pounding. Rope burns.
Climbing.
Rappelling. Those were injuries she'd seen before. In a very specific context. Those were the kinds of scars you got from military training. Sarah's mind raced as she stared at the sleeping child through the glass. Rope burns from climbing and rappelling. Orthodontic work that suggested a middle-class background, a mother who'd been a Navy SEAL. The pieces were starting to come together, forming a picture that made Sarah's blood run cold. She pulled out her phone, her fingers trembling slightly as she opened her contacts and scrolled through names she hadn't looked at in years. There was one person who might have answers. One person who'd kept track of everyone from their BUD/S class and the women who'd come after. Commander Rachel Torres had been Sarah's mentor, her friend, and the closest thing to family she'd had during her years in the teams. Rachel had retired 3 years ago and now worked as a consultant for the Department of Defense, but she still maintained connections throughout the SEAL community. Sarah stepped away from the PICU window and found an empty conference room, closing the door behind her before dialing Rachel's number. It rang 4 times before a familiar voice answered, rough with sleep. This better be important, Mitchell. It's 6 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. Despite everything, Sarah felt a small smile tug at her lips. When did you start sleeping past 5, Commander? There was a pause. Then Rachel's voice came back, fully alert now, and filled with surprise.
Sarah.
Jesus Christ, is that really you? It's been what, 3 years since you called? The smile faded from Sarah's face. I need your help, Rachel. I need you to tell me about every female SEAL who's gone dark in the last 2 years. Especially anyone with a daughter around 11 or 12 years old. The silence on the other end of the line stretched out so long that Sarah thought the call might have dropped. Then Rachel spoke, her voice careful, controlled. Why are you asking me this, Sarah? What's going on? Sarah looked through the conference room window toward the PICU, where the girl lay fighting for her life. I have a patient, a homeless kid, who came into my ER this morning half dead from pneumonia and sepsis. She recognized my trident tattoo. Rachel, she told me her mother had the same one. She knew what it meant. Another long silence. Then Rachel said something that made Sarah's world tilt on its axis. Describe her. The girl. What does she look like? Sarah closed her eyes, picturing the child's face. Dark hair, dark eyes, dark skin, maybe 5 feet tall, very thin from malnutrition. She has a small scar above her left eyebrow, and her hands show old rope burns consistent with climbing training. She's probably 12, maybe 13 years old. Rachel, who is she? She heard Rachel take a deep breath, heard the sound of movement as the older woman got out of bed and walked somewhere more private. When Rachel spoke again, her voice was tight with emotion Sarah had rarely heard from the tough-as-nails commander. Her name is Zara. Zara Thompson. And if she's in Boston, then her mother is probably dead. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She gripped the edge of the conference table to steady herself. As Rachel continued, Lieutenant Commander Nicole Thompson. She was in the class 2 years after yours. One of the best operators I ever saw. She did 3 tours in Afghanistan, 2 in Iraq, more classified missions than I can count. She was awarded the Silver Star for Valor, 2 Bronze Stars, and a Purple Heart. She was a goddamn hero, Sarah. Sarah's throat was so tight, she could barely speak. What happened to her? Rachel's voice was heavy with grief and anger. 18 months ago, Nicole's husband was killed in a training accident at Coronado. He was a SEAL, too, part of Team 3. Nicole took emergency leave to deal with his death and take care of Zara, but something went wrong. She started showing signs of PTSD, severe depression. The Navy offered her help, counseling, medical support, but she refused it all, said she could handle it on her own. Sarah sank into one of the conference room chairs, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Rachel, what happened? Where is Nicole now? She heard Rachel moving around, heard the sound of a door closing, ensuring complete privacy for this conversation. 6 months after her husband died, Nicole disappeared. She took Zara and vanished without a trace. The Navy launched an investigation, but it was complicated. Nicole wasn't AWOL technically because she was on extended leave and there was no evidence of foul play. She just left. But why? Sarah demanded. Why would she run? Why wouldn't she accept help? Rachel's sigh was heavy with regret. Because she was drowning, Sarah, and she didn't know how to ask for help. You remember what it was like. How we were trained to be invincible, to never show weakness, to handle everything on our own. Nicole took that to an extreme. After her husband died, she became paranoid. Convinced that someone had killed him, that it wasn't an accident. She started investigating on her own, making accusations, alienating everyone who tried to help her. Sarah thought about Zara lying in that hospital bed. Thought about the fear in her eyes when she'd first woken up. Asterisk, don't send me back there. Please don't make me go back, star. Rachel, where do you think Nicole took Zara? What was she running from? There was a long pause before Rachel answered. And when she did, her voice was grim. The last confirmed sighting of Nicole was in Providence, Rhode Island about 4 months ago. A former teammate spotted her at a homeless shelter. She looked rough, Sarah. Paranoid, malnourished, clearly not well. She had Zara with her. And when he tried to approach them, Nicole ran. He tried to follow, tried to help, but she disappeared into the streets. Sarah felt sick. For months ago in Providence, and now Zara was here in Boston, alone without her mother. Do you think Nicole is still alive? Rachel was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I don't know. If she was still alive and capable, she wouldn't have let Zara end up on the streets alone. Nicole loved that kid more than anything in the world. Whatever happened, whatever state Nicole was in mentally, she would have protected Zara with her last breath. If Zara's alone now, she didn't need to finish the sentence. Sarah stood up, pacing the small conference room like a caged animal. I need to find out what happened. Zara deserves to know. She deserves to have answers. Rachel's voice took on a warning tone. Sarah, be careful. If Nicole was right, if there was something more to her husband's death, then you could be walking into something dangerous. And even if she was just paranoid, just sick, there are people in the Navy who won't want the story getting out. A decorated SEAL officer losing her mind and ending up homeless with her daughter. That's not the kind of publicity the teams need right now. I don't give a damn about publicity, Sarah snapped. I care about that little girl upstairs who's fighting for her life. She's one of ours, Rachel. Her mother was one of ours. We don't leave people behind, remember? That's what the trident means. She heard Rachel's sharp intake of breath, heard the emotion in her voice when she responded. You're right. You're absolutely right. What do you need from me? Sarah looked out through the conference room window toward the PICU. Everything you have on Nicole Thompson, her service record, her husband's death investigation, any reports from the last 18 months, and I need it quietly, Rachel. If there's even a chance that Nicole was right about something being wrong, I don't want to tip off anyone who might be involved. 2 hours later, Sarah sat in the hospital's small doctor's lounge, her laptop open in front of her, reading through the encrypted files Rachel had sent. The service record of Lieutenant Commander Nicole Thompson was impressive and heartbreaking in equal measure. Born in Atlanta to a military family, Nicole had joined the Navy at 18, determined to follow in her father's footsteps. She'd excelled at everything she touched, rising through the ranks quickly, earning her commission, and then doing the unthinkable, volunteering for BUD/S training. The photos in her file showed a striking woman with dark brown skin, closely cropped natural hair, and intense eyes, the same eyes Sarah had seen in Zara's face. Nicole had graduated BUD/S in the top 10% of her class, one of only 3 women in that particular training cycle. She'd been assigned to SEAL Team 7 and had deployed immediately to Afghanistan, where she distinguished herself in combat operations that were still heavily classified. Sarah scrolled through commendation after commendation, mission report after mission report, building a picture of a warrior who'd been absolutely dedicated to her country and her team. Then she reached the file on Lieutenant James Thompson, Nicole's husband. He'd been a SEAL too, assigned to Team 3, and, according to the official report, he died during a routine training exercise at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. The report stated that he'd been participating in a high-altitude parachute jump when his main chute failed to deploy properly. He'd activated his reserve chute, but it had tangled with the main, and he'd hit the ground at fatal speed. Sarah read through the investigation report carefully. The equipment had been inspected and found to be in proper working order before the jump. The weather conditions had been acceptable. James had been an experienced jumper with over 200 successful jumps in his record. The official conclusion was accidental death due to equipment malfunction and user error. But in the margins of the report, someone had made handwritten notes, and Sarah recognized Nicole's handwriting from other documents in the file. The notes were frantic, desperate, circling certain phrases and adding question marks. Asterisk chute inspected by WH. Weather report doesn't match my records. James never made user errors. Check his locker. Someone had access star. The notes painted a picture of a woman spiraling into paranoia and conspiracy theories. Or possibly a woman who'd seen something everyone else had missed. Sarah found the psychological evaluation that had been ordered after Nicole started making accusations. The Navy psychiatrist had diagnosed her with acute PTSD, complicated grief, and possible paranoid delusions. The recommendation had been for immediate intensive treatment, possibly inpatient care, but Nicole had refused. And because she was on leave and not an immediate danger to herself or others, the Navy couldn't force her into treatment. The last official document in the file was a missing persons report filed by Nicole's sister 3 months after Nicole and Zara had disappeared. The sister, Simone Thompson, lived in Atlanta and had been trying desperately to find them. She'd hired private investigators, contacted every shelter and social service agency on the East Coast, and pleaded with the Navy to do more, but there had been no trace of Nicole or Zara until now. Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed the number listed for Simone in the file. It rang 3 times before a woman's voice answered, cautious and tired. "Hello." Sarah took a deep breath. "Miss Thompson, my name is Dr. Sarah Mitchell. I'm calling from Boston Memorial Hospital. I believe I have your niece, Zara, in my care." The sound that came through the phone was somewhere between a sob and a gasp.
Zara.
"Oh my God. Is she alive? Is she okay? Where's Nicole? Where's my sister?" Sarah's heart clenched at the desperation in Simone's voice. "Zara is alive, but she's very sick. She came into my emergency room early this morning with severe pneumonia and sepsis. She's in our pediatric intensive care unit right now on a ventilator, but she's stable and we're hopeful she'll recover. As for Nicole, Zara was alone when she was found. I'm sorry, but we don't know where your sister is." There was silence on the other end of the line, then the sound of crying, deep wrenching sobs that spoke of months of fear and helplessness finally breaking through. Sarah waited, giving Simone time to process the news, her own eyes burning with unshed tears. Finally, Simone's voice came back, shaky but determined. "I'm coming to Boston. I'm getting on the next flight. Don't let anyone take her, Dr. Mitchell. Don't let them put her in the system. She's family. She belongs with me." "I'll do everything I can," Sarah promised. "But Miss Thompson, I need to ask you some questions. When is the last time you saw or heard from Nicole?" Simone took a shuddering breath. 14 months ago. She called me from a blocked number. Wouldn't tell me where she was. She sounded crazy, Dr. Mitchell. She was talking about conspiracies, about people following her, about how she had to protect Zara from them. I begged her to come stay with me, to let me help, but she said she couldn't trust anyone, that they were watching everyone connected to her. Then she hung up, and I never heard from her again. Sarah made notes as Simone talked, her medical training warring with her instincts as a former operator. "Did Nicole ever tell you specifically who they were? Who she thought was after her?" Simone hesitated. "She mentioned names a few times, but they didn't mean anything to me. Military people, I think. She kept saying something about the contract and the deal, and how James had found out something he wasn't supposed to know. She said that's why they killed him, to keep him quiet. But, Dr. Mitchell, the Navy investigated. They said it was an accident. They said Nicole was sick, that her grief had made her paranoid." Sarah thought about the notes in Nicole's handwriting, the questions that had never been answered. "What do you think, Miss Thompson? Do you think your sister was paranoid, or do you think she might have been right?" There was a long pause. "I think my sister was one of the smartest, most capable people I've ever known. I think she was trained to notice things other people miss, to see patterns and threats. And I think that even if grief and PTSD affected her judgment, that doesn't mean she was wrong about everything. Nicole wasn't crazy, Dr. Mitchell. She was scared. And now she's gone. And her daughter nearly died alone on the streets. So you tell me, was she paranoid or was she right to run?" Sarah looked up as her pager went off, the pick a number flashing on the screen. "Miss Thompson, I have to go. There's an emergency with Zara. Get here as fast as you can." She hung up and ran for the elevators, her heart pounding. When she burst into Zara's room, she found Patricia and 2 nurses working frantically over the small body on the bed. The monitors were screaming alarms, and Zara's oxygen saturation was dropping despite the ventilator. "She's thrown a clot," Patricia said grimly, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "Pulmonary embolism. We need to get her to the ER now for an embolectomy, or we're going to lose her." Sarah grabbed the end of the bed, helping to wheel it toward the door. And as they rushed through the hallways toward the operating room, she made a silent promise to the unconscious girl. "I won't let you die. Your mother was a warrior, and so are you. And I'm going to find out what really happened to your family, Zara. I swear it.